don't we try it? And we have not liked. So that was important to me. And the arts and religion can be collective, of course, but just for my own self. I never thought I would know as much about the stained glass windows upstairs and what the significance is and what the meaning is of the windows and what those people wanted to say and what the pastor wanted to say. And it is inclusive. That art is inclusive. And so I was like, oh, look, I can see it here, I can look there. I can be in this community. It is so inclusive. And that's why I'm still
Judy. Okay, yeah, last one. Trent Beltman, company since the 80s. Walked into the church and just felt the community, and that's still something that brings me back. I love it that we have multi-generations, and even though now I'm part of an older generation than when I walked in, I love the interaction now with the younger people the same way I liked it with the older people when I was younger. I feel like, and now I feel like, yeah, maybe church needs to be done in a different way. Things are changing. Not everybody, comes on a Sunday morning. So how we're going to respond to those changes? And I think this is one part of that conversation.
Thank you so much, everyone. And the one thing I wanted to just add in is that hearing what everyone said really just emphasized to me what an important conversation this is, and that next week we do have a part 2 to this conversation. And Rabbi Ilan will not be able to be with us that day, but that throughout this week, do keep thinking about this, and what are your questions, and what did it bring up, and to know that we have that opportunity to continue the conversation next week, and then beyond. So, just ending with that word. So, well, I don't know, turn it to you.
That's great. Let me just say this, just from the notes that I jotted down from the wisdom that you just shared and the stories and the insight and the experiences, there may not be all that many revelations from what I have to say, because maybe church needs to be done in a different way. Thank you, Drew. Right? That constantly giving up something you love to create something new, as Nancy said. And this is a church that has been in constant transition. These are just different ways of saying exactly what I'm about to say. So I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to say this. If you just want to leave early, let me give you the Cliff's Notes of what I'm going to say. The Cliff's Notes of what I'm going to say is the Church of the Covenant is a really special place. That a place that had already reoriented its business model in the 1980s, 30 years before any other churches really in the neighborhood here, certainly in the Boston area, and very few churches in the country had started to think about bringing in mission-aligned nonprofits to rent space from the churches. No one else was doing it. So you've already got a 30-year track record. You probably have a 150-year track record, being a little bit ahead of the game. Maybe when we talk about Kindle Collective, way ahead. So that's a little bit about what I want to say. The other thing is that, Robert, I haven't had an opportunity to get to know you, but what I can say is that when you have a leader who is as courageous, visionary, humble, thoughtful, and entrepreneurial as someone like Julie, you don't need to stay up at night worrying about the future of the church. When you have somebody who is already oriented around the concepts of servant leadership, which means really meeting people where they're at, understanding what their deeply felt needs are. These are the types of things that they're training people in business schools, everywhere around the country. Oh, you want to create a new app? Well, you have to learn what keeps people in it. You have to learn what makes their heart beat, what their passions are, what they're worried about, what might stop them from actualizing their potential. You have somebody who's already naturally inclined to do that. And that's an incredible talent. So yes, we're working together. She called me a teacher or mentor, something like that. And it's not every day that I get to walk into a space and say the same exact thing about the person that introduced me, and that's true. So that's if you just want to walk out. You can say, well, I got the cheese, I got the crackers, I get to know some people around the community a little bit better. So that's it. We're pretty good. We're in good shape. Now, if you want to stick around and say a few other things. And I'm probably going to stand up at some point and move around because I'm passionate about this stuff. let me tell you a little bit about me, and that might sort of orient the conversation and tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. And so I'm a 7th generation rabbi. That means that I probably, this being a rabbi was probably the last thing on my list of things that I wanted to become. Starting at a very young age. What do you want to be when you grow up? Anything. Astronaut. I'll be a coach. I'll be a, anything. And then it turned out that, the calling comes at funny times. I felt calling. So I grew up in I actually grew up in a church, believe it or not. I grew up in a lay-led community called the Newton Center Minyan. Minyan is 10 people who come together to pray. And the Newton Center Minyan first met in someone's living room, and then some bigger living room, and then ultimately, by the time I can remember, we were first in the basement of a Baptist church in Newton Center, and then we moved to the sanctuary, and my bar mitzvah was under a 30-foot cross. So suffice it to say that I'm very comfortable here today. Yes, you're very inclusive, and yes, you're welcoming, and someone greeted me at the door, and and this just feels like home. So for me, I've always been oriented around very porous boundaries when it comes to who's a leader, who's a follower, who's part of the community. I've always found that those boundaries certainly can serve an institution, they can serve individuals in some cases, but for the most part, and certainly in the future that we're moving towards in the religious and spiritual world, many of those boundaries, who's in, who's out, who's this, who's that, binary, yes, no, those things aren't really going to serve us anymore. Right? So when we talk about a place that 35 years ago was welcoming, and not just a sign on the front door that says we're welcoming, but was actually welcoming, well, then this is a place that's on the front lines. This is a place that's on the cutting edge. So on the other side of the family, I'm the 7th generation rabbi from my grandmother's father was the 4th in a line of chief rabbis up in Tiberias in Israel, the northern part of Israel. And then my father's side of the family, they were labor organizers. So suffice it to say that when I got introduced to GBIO back in 2004, 2005, 2006, I thought, wow, we can actually do faith and we can do justice. We can organize and we can live out our spiritual mission together. We can do that in a multi-faith context. Like, I might have died and gone ahead. That was so much of my identity finally coming together. Now, early on in my life, again, while I was saying anything but becoming a rabbi, early on in my life, I began working sort of as an activist around special needs. And it's because people in my family struggled quite a bit inside of the public school system. And so when I was 17, I went to the Parks and Rec department in my town, and I said, why is there no camp? Why is there no camp for children with special needs? Why is it that, if you have one kid with special needs and another is typically functioning, why is it that one has to get dropped off at one camp and another at another? Why is that the case? And the more you ask why, the more you understand there's an opportunity, right? And so when I was 17, I was part of co-founding a camp in my hometown for children with special needs. And it was at that moment that I thought to myself, wow, anything is possible. Like if I can get a bureaucratic city system to be able to reorient their funds to actually serving the people who had serious, deeply felt needs, both the families and the children themselves, and create a space where everyone felt welcomed and they felt loved and they felt blessed, and I really do actually mean blessed, then anything is possible. So that was both a good thing and a bad thing, because if someone tells you at 17 that anything's possible, you might just develop a real deep sense of chutzpah when someone says no to you. So moving forward, I'm going to sort of just give you a couple of snippets getting us to today. When I was 17, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And unfortunately, when the doctor said there's nothing we can do, that was a no that I had to accept. But I did realize, okay, I'm not going to be able to cure cancer, but at least let me solve a problem that my family is experiencing, which is that, he was the major breadwinner. So what can I do at 17, at 18, at 19 to begin to change that dynamic? So I started a painting company. We're in the Northeast, and so everybody needs a paint job in their house. And over the course of 3 years, And my father actually, sort of helped me build it out. I grew it to get Ford Cruise running, and it was growing. It was nice. It was great. And the last conversation I had with my father, actually, before he went into a coma and then he passed away when I was 21, the very last conversation I had with him was he said, I'm really proud of you and what you've done. And he said, well, how do you feel about it? And I said, well, I guess I'm proud, but I kind of was just more worried about how you would feel about it. And he said, you don't need to worry about what I feel about it or what your mother feels about it. He said, you need to do something that's going to matter to you. He said, since day one, what we've always taught you is that our mission in life is to leave this world a little bit better than the way it was when we got here. And you might be able to do that in this capacity, and maybe this is a passion for you, and go. Build it. But if it's not, life's too short. And that was the last conversation I had with my father. So, as I was sitting Shiva that summer, when the community comes together, everyone visits your home, and you're surrounded by prayer and stories, all these amazing adventures that my dad had gone on that I never knew about, his friends would tell me. And it was actually, believe it or not, the most uplifted I had felt in 5 years since he was diagnosed. And that for me was a profound revelation. And that's where the calling happened. And that's where I looked around the room, and I had sort of walked away from faith for a little while. And that's where I looked around the room and said, this is what I need to do. I didn't know what the this was, but I knew this is what I needed. So as I decided where I was going to go to rabbinical school, I went to the one place that had a track record of being courageous enough to say, when only men were being ordained, to say women need to be ordained. And when only heteronormative people were being ordained, we needed to shift that game, and they were the first place to ordain LGBTQ people. And for me, that was going to be the place where I was going to plant my own flag, where I was going to be formed. And so what it meant, unfortunately, I had to move out to the West Coast, so I was a little further away from family than I like, but LA is not so bad. And this was a place where I began to bring together these different threads of identity. So that's enough to tell you about me. When I finally moved back to the Northeast, I worked as a rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Providence. It's not 150 years old, almost 100 at this point. And it's a place that largely was struggling to figure out who it was, who it is, and who it's going to be in the future. And it's a place that was almost, while it was visited and blessed by the memories of what it was in its quote-unquote heyday, when we were really measuring things just by size, not really by impact, but to say when attendance was larger, it was almost haunted by that memory. And so it was a place that desperately needed a new vision. And so I came in and built something actually quite similar to what Julie is now building, Kindling Collective, where I had to sort of convince the board that I was going to do this, but I spent about 50% of my time out of the building, whether it was in coffee shops or and people would always come up to me, they'd see me wearing the kippah, and they'd say, are you a rabbi? And I'd say, yeah, you got me. And they'd say, well, I'm not Jewish, but. Or they'd say, well, I'm a bad Jew, but. And I was like, what does that even mean, bad Jew? You don't like going to worship services? Neither do I. We're good. You don't believe the God in the sky that's angry at you and is going to smite you? Well, neither do I. That's great. Both of those things don't work. Let's talk. Or they'd say, what does the Bible tell you about my brother? I've been estranged from my brother for 15 years. And what does the Talmud have to say about that? Or I have a son with an opioid addiction. What does the Talmud have to say about that? And I would sit with people, and I would listen. And so over time, there was a number of different other things we were able to do, but in short, I spent quite a bit of time on the, sort of in the margins of the community, innovating, developing new models of ways to serve these individuals. And on the inside of it, I also have an MBA, so I spent a lot of time on the existing, we'll call them products and services. I'm going to speak business language a little bit, I'm going to flow back and forth, but on the existing products and services and delivery systems of the synagogue, making them more efficient, streamlining them, so on and so forth. We were running a deficit of, at the time, 152,000, moved us into the black in year one. We were losing members at about 15 to 20 every single year, which is, I don't know, at the time, 3 to 5% every single year, and I moved us to a place where we were growing by 4%. And all of these were not monumental shifts, but it was simply reorienting ourselves not on the business model, but on the mission. And that's really important to take. That if you fall in love with the model, you are Blockbuster saying no thanks to Netflix when they had an opportunity to buy Netflix back in 2006. No, that's never going to, who's ever going to just want to stay at home? They love walking into the brick and mortar. They love holding the DVD in their hand. And Reed Hastings of Netflix says, okay, Wayne Huizinga, sounds good, right? And by the way, Blockbuster's not out of business. There are still 10 Blockbusters in northern Alaska. If you do want to hold it, if you really believe that that is the case, you need to hold the DVD. You still can, but you need to take 2 planes and several buses and maybe a dog sled to get there because they don't have internet. It's so far out that there are 10 Blockbusters in northern Alaska. So, the point being, if you fall in love with the model, you end up losing touch with the mission. So I want to talk a little bit about some things that are happening in the business world. That's why I brought up this. If you look at the Forbes 500 list of the top companies, the major, I think the threshold is 5 million and up, from pre-1980. I want you to guess what percentage of them are out of business. I want you to guess. Let's go. What percentage of those companies are now out of business? The ones that from pre-1980. Okay. Keep going. Keep going up. 80%. 80% of the largest companies in the country that existed pre-1980 are now out of business. And in the next 4 years, by 2021, another 17% are going to go out of business. Which means that by 2021, 3% companies in America that were running the show pre-1980 will be out, only 3% will still be in business. And not one of them is still a major competitor. So what does that tell you is happening? When we talk about a changing landscape in the for-profit world, this is a seismic shift. This is a seismic shift. Legacy institutions, legacy companies that have been around for that long, and what happened is they fell in love with the business model. So the products and services ossified. They became so connected to what it is that we've always done, with an assumption that people are always going to want those things. But the way what's happening in the world right now is such major sociological shifts, demographic shifts, economic shifts in America, that those organizations who don't have an ear to the ground, who aren't actually listening, and aren't actually focused on serving existing members today, not the members from 30 years, not the products and services from 30 years ago, but who are we today and who are we going to be tomorrow? They've fallen so out of line with their mission. So what's Blockbuster's mission? What was the point of Blockbuster? What did you do? Was it to go meet people and hang out in front of the new releases? Was it for singles to go hang? No, what was the point? You went to Blockbuster to do what? Get a movie. Okay, so the job to be done at Blockbuster was for you to be able to watch a movie. To watch a movie. So it didn't actually matter what the delivery system was. It turns out that that's going to change. They started out with Betamax, then they moved to VHS, then they moved to DVD, although they were pretty late moving to DVD, right? But the delivery system didn't matter. Services didn't matter. The point was we're going to get you to watch a movie. That's the key. They fell so out of line with that they focused more on their established, what they already had going on. They said, no, it's the delivery system that people really are in love with. The delivery system is the brick and mortar Blockbuster that you walk into and then you get charged late fees and you didn't mind it. And by the way, the year before the Blockbuster went under, they charged $75 million in late fees. That was the highest. So what does that mean? They're not serving people anymore. They were trying to stay in business. Okay? Now, personally, when I think about the job of a spiritual institution, the job of a church is to build people and not the other way around. The job of a church is to build people. It's to build communities. It's to build social fabric. It's to rewrite the social contract. That's the job of a church, not the job of the people to build the church. And when we shift that business model away from servant leadership, that's when we really lose focus of mission. So a couple other things. Who are the businesses now big legacy businesses that are staying in business, they're using something called the 3-box solution. So I live in Providence. Hasbro Toys almost went out of business about 15 years ago. Today, Alan Hassenfeld, the owner of Hasbro, the Hassenfeld brothers, Alan Hassenfeld, became the second billionaire in Rhode Island because the market cap of Hasbro has grown by 60% just in the last 3 years. So how is that possible in a business that was about to go out of business? Here's what they do. It's called a 3-box solution. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later. But there are essentially 3 boxes. Box 1 is the stuff you're doing today. Can you make it more efficient? Can you make sure that it actually serves your existing customers as best as it possibly can? Upgrade every single thing that you can do. Box 3, this is where Kindling Collective comes in. Can you develop new models, new delivery systems, new ways of serving people, even if they might fall out of line with the business model of Box 1? So in other words, this is a beautiful church. I don't even know if Kindling Collective meetings are always inside of the church, are they? Are they always here?
No, not always.
There we go. So they're not always using, right, the existing. So that means it might be out of the building. That means it might be folks who don't formally become members. That might mean it's going to be multi-faith, right? That's a different shift too. So box 3 is where you're innovating and developing. Always have to be innovative. One important thing about innovation, every single tradition that you hold dear was once an innovation. Right? So for those who are scared by the word innovation, every single tradition, there was a bunch of people sitting around a table said, how might we serve God? How might we live out Jesus' mission? How might we build community? And then they innovated, right? The Passover Seder, that whole thing, that wasn't created the moment that they got out of it. They weren't like, okay, let's bring this bread that we can only make for 18 minutes. Let's take the matzah with us, and while we're running from the Egyptians, let's come up with a way to spend 12 hours sitting around a table eating horseradish and telling stories. No, they were like, let's get the heck out of here because they're going to kill us. And then, 500 years later, we developed Passover. Okay, that was an innovation because they were asking, how might we remember what it was like to be strangers in a strange land? It says that 36 times in the Bible. 36 times, which, by the way, according to the gematria, that 36, the number 36 means 2 lives. 18 means high, which means life. 36 means life times 2. Because when you remember that you were a stranger in a strange land and you greet the stranger with open arms and a whole heart, you get new life and so does the stranger. That's why it's mentioned 36 times in the Bible. So that's just an innovation that made it. Now the Talmud, there's a whole tractate, there's a whole section of the Talmud that talks about all of the holidays that never made it. Right? There's 26 holidays that never made it. Why? Some for really practical reasons, and you see the text when the rabbis are in conference. Well, why did Yom Nicanor not make it? Well, because it's a week after the other holiday, and we got to go to work. We can't take all these days off. Okay, so some were practical reasons. Others were they had one holiday remembering the destruction of the first temple. Well, then they rebuilt it. So they said, why are we remembering the destruction of the first temple if we just have a new one? Let's just go to temple, right? And then, of course, the second one got destroyed, so then they moved the date, and then, right? But there were 26 holidays that didn't make it. So every single tradition that we have is an innovation that made it. You go to a Jewish wedding. What do they do at the very end, before they kiss? They step on the glass, right? Well, in the year 400, in the Persian communities, all the congregants went to the rabbis and then said, you know, in all the Persian communities, they're breaking the glass at the end, and we think it's so beautiful. And the rabbi said, we'll never do that. It's not a Jewish thing. And, and then they said, well, then you're not going to marry us anymore. And they said, on second thought, actually, that breaking the glass is so beautiful. So then they ascribed 50 different meanings to the breaking of the glass. You can't find a rabbi who can actually tell you why it is that we break the glass. It was an innovation that made it. So kindling might be an innovation that makes it. 50 years from now, on the 200th anniversary of Church of the Covenant, we might be saying, no, we've always had kindling. We've always had kindling. Yeah. Julie was around in the early 1900s.
She's in the window.
That's what happened. There's a stained glass. There she is. There she is over at Emerson College doing the faith scene. Zines were around since the 1400s. Absolutely. That's what you're going to say when innovations make it. single tradition is an innovation that made it, and every innovation is a tradition that hasn't yet. Box 2. Box 2. What are the products and services that we are offering today that are no longer serving the mission of Box 1? And this is the hardest part. I have worked with hundreds of organizations in my capacity, hundreds of organizations that are so good at it. They will streamline everything, Box 1. They will innovate like there's no tomorrow, but they can't let go of it. Why not? Why can't? Why not? And this is real.
Emotional investment.
It's part of their identity.
It's part of their identity. Nancy said right at the very beginning, right? I've been around for long enough to tell you that the Church of the Covenant is constantly in transition, and that's a great thing. And it sometimes means that we've had to let go of something that we really loved. Right? It's easy to do that in theory, but what if it's the thing that you really love? What if you really loved red chairs and they told you, no, we're going to get blue and green chairs now because that's what we're moving to. And you said, no, the red chairs are part of who I was. My father sat in a red chair. Right? It's hard to do. It's the single hardest thing to do. But you're in an organization that has limited capacity. Every organization has limited capacity. So you got to pick your lane. And I'm telling you right now, the fact that Church of the Covenant invested in Kindred tells you everything you need to know. Everything you need to know. Because those funds, that energy, those resources, the human capital, the wisdom that Julie's got, all of that stuff could have just been doubled down inside of Box 1. But you're seeing a vision for the future. And that's where Box 3 is. That means there were some things in Box 2 that didn't happen. That's critical. So let me tell you about some church trends. This is where the don't shoot the messenger. Okay. 4,000 to 7,000 churches have been closing every year since 2010. We're moving into the 8th year running. What percentage of Americans do you think get their religion online?
60.
60%? 67%. 200 million Americans get religious resources online. That's where they go first before they might actually walk into a building, which most of them don't.
Can you say more about what those resources are?
Could mean streaming services. It could mean I want to have my justice of the peace friend do my wedding instead of going to the pastor. It could mean I want to write my own eulogy and I'm not a member of a community, so I'm going through this process myself. It might mean I want to put together my Passover Seder and I don't want to talk to the rabbi because he's, you can say what you want about the rabbi. So it could mean any of those things. All right, what percentage of Americans say they go to church every week? No. Thank you. 40% say they go to church every week. How many of them actually go?
20.
Thank you. Wow, you're good. She read my notes. No, she read my notes. Okay. Robert Putnam, the Harvard sociologist, he wrote Bowling Alone about 20 years ago. That's what first turned me on to community organizing. He wrote American Grace about 10 years ago. These are books that sort of tracked these major seismic shifts. He said, it is impossible to exaggerate what a historical change is taking place in the American religious landscape. This trend, disaffiliation, has the potential for completely transforming American society. And he doesn't say that lightly. So why is this happening? There are two main reasons. The first we talked a little bit about, that's mission drift. When you get away from what it is that the organization was built to do. So you tell me, what's a mission of a church? Let's come up with one. Let's wordsmith a few missions.
Community and personal transformation.
Beautiful. Community and personal transformation. Great.
Welcome the stranger.
Welcome the stranger. Great.
Getting to know God. New ways and traditional ways.
Beautiful.
Learning to exercise love.
Exercise love. Not just feel it. Create an action out of it. Great.
Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked.
Justice, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked. Great. Great. And what do you measure? How do you know if you're doing a good job?
Feeling.
How does the church know if it's doing a good job?
Numbers, like how many people are coming, how many are getting married.
Right.
Feedback.
How many? What's that?
Feedback.
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 Good. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Participation.
Participation. So that's a great word. It says a lot. I think for the most part, many of the churches and synagogues and even federations and religious foundations, they measure how many people come to worship services. That's probably the one measurable. If you ask someone and they want to tell you how great it is, oh, on Easter Sunday we had X number of people, right? I didn't hear one person say the mission of the church is to get people to attend services, right? So this is actually really important, that we get away from our mission because we convince ourselves of a certain metric that doesn't actually tell the story of our mission, doesn't actually measure our mission. Which, by the way, might mean that if you only had 75 people in services, but you fed 200 people that week, you have way surpassed your mission. If 100 people have felt and exercised real inclusive love, then you have way surpassed your mission. But if we promise transformation and we're only measuring attendance, then we're in the entertainment industry. Right? So one of the things that can keep organizations from that mission drift is, one, to go back to the mission, and two, to make sure that every single thing you're doing, you are measuring the impact along the lines of that mission. That way you can hold yourself accountable. So I will give you an example of an organization that did that. The Church Building and Loan Fund of the United Church of Christ. I work closely with them. So the Church Building and Loan Fund of the United Church, I can't tell you how many millions of dollars or close to billions, but a lot of money in an endowment. And guess what the job of a church building and loan fund is to do?
To loan money for church building.
Boom! Great. You read my notes too. And you ain't read my notes. No, I have my eyes on you. I have my eyes on you. Watch me. Right? So the Church Building and Loan Fund, you guessed it, that's the job. And they saw how many churches are closing every single year. And they said, why would we possibly throw good money after that? And there are so many underutilized churches that if we want to plant churches, let's use the existing buildings rather than starting from scratch. Very simple. So they reoriented their mission and they asked themselves, why are we here in the first place? What's the job of a church? What was the mission at UCC? To tell people that God is still speaking, to make sure that communities are inclusive, to make sure that we're on the cutting edge and we're serving the margins, the frontiers, the centers, and that the big tent actually does welcome people from all walks of life. So they reoriented that entire mission based on what they really believed. Scripture had told them to do, what they really believed Jesus would have wanted them to do, and what they believed they needed to do given the context of American religion today. They're no longer investing in churches. They're done. They're training spiritual entrepreneurs who are eradicating poverty and creating social equity in the world. That is a reorientation of mission. And when you feel like you're at the crossroads, actually my organization, CLAW, was founded by Elie Wiesel, blessed memory, and a rabbi named Yitz Greenberg. And they argued that we were at a crossroads. In Judaism, we had about 2,000 years of biblical Judaism where we served in the temple, and that's how we were oriented. About 2,000 years of rabbinic Judaism, and then things are changing now. And they said, when you feel like you are at that crossroads, you have to pick your path and go all in. And that's what they did. Right? That's an example of of an organization aware of their own mission drift and then trying to realign themselves back with the mission. The second major reason for the sort of transformative seismic changes happening in American religion today is fluidity of identity. Fluidity of identity. So I'll tell you what that means. For a long time, and I'm going to speak just from the Jewish perspective for a little while. In the Jewish world, about 80% of the funds, philanthropic funds, foundation funds, donor advised funds, are directed towards programs and organizations whose job it is to sort of help people become more Jewish. For lack of really better terms, what does that mean? More engaged with Jewish identity, maybe doing more Jewish stuff, maybe being more Jewish, learning more Jewish, so on and so forth. So that's great, right? But here's the problem. Not one Jewish person in America wakes up in the morning and says, I'm not Jewish enough. Okay? That doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. Jerry doesn't. We know that. Jerry's not worried about that. She didn't wake up today and said, I'm not Jewish enough. I should go to church. Okay, so we know that people aren't waking up with that problem. So why is it that all of these resources are getting channeled to solving a problem that doesn't exist? I'll tell you a story. About 3 years ago, I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And about 3 years ago, I was out to brunch. It was Sunday brunch with my wife and our son, who was 2.5 at the time, Micah. It's named after my father, actually. And we're at brunch, and we're ordering, and we're sitting, it's by the waterside in Warren, Rhode Island. It's a beautiful place. And this guy pulls in a Bentley convertible, the top down, $250,000 car. I looked it up afterwards. I was like, I thought Rhode Island was broke. Who is this guy? He must have like Massachusetts place. So he pulls in, and my son, he says, Abba. I said, yeah, it means father. He says, Abba, that poor man. I said, what do you mean? He said, that poor man only has half a car. So my son was looking at this guy and projecting a problem that the man didn't experience. The man didn't wake up and say, oh no, I have half a car. No, he said, I have a Bentley, and I'm going to take this top down and ride around Warren Road. So for religious organizations to look at people and assume that they have a problem like, I'm not Christian enough, I'm not Catholic enough, I'm not Jewish enough, I'm not Muslim. When people themselves don't experience that, that's not just bad business, it's bad faith. So why is it that that's not a problem to solve anymore? Because identity has gone from being an end to a means. It's gone from being an end to a means. And that means that the religion that we teach, the spirituality that we teach, if we can convey it in such a way that it is experienced and received as a set of tools and practices and wisdoms that can help you live a better life, that can help you flourish, that can help you be a better spouse, father, son, lover, parent, grandson, congregant, pastor, any of those things, then that's a functional wisdom. That's a wisdom that can help people whether they're sitting in church on Sunday morning or whether they're stuck in traffic and trying to cultivate a sense of patience, or whether they're at a GBIO rally and they're really worried about the state of what's happening. If that's the type of wisdom that is a means, not an end, if that's the type of identity, the type of tools and lenses and practices and rituals, then people receive it with open arms. And we've seen this. I mean, I've seen this around the country. The churches and synagogues and mosques that are flourishing see their wisdom, their faith tradition, and all of the rituals and practices that come with it. They teach it in such a way that it can be experienced and received as a tool, not as an end. So it might be that someone wakes up in the morning and says, I haven't been a good husband. What might Jewish wisdom teach me about that? Or how can my community of people who are also trying to exercise a greater love help me along that path? Or I just lost my father and I'm sitting at home alone. How might my community teach me both to be less lonely and feel less lonely? Solving real problems that really exist in me. Now, with all of the mixing and bending and switching and blending of identities, I think it's important also to know that religious institutions depended on labels. Right? We depended on labels. Well, if I'm new to town and I want to be the new, Chabad rabbi in town, or I have a synagogue, I'm going to find the list of who are all the Jews in town. Now here's the problem. 94% of Jews who were surveyed by the Pew Center, 94% said they're proud to be Jewish. 31% are affiliated with any Jewish organization. Which means that 63% are not interested in being found on that Jewish list. 63% are saying, yes, I am absolutely proud to be Jewish, and all of those things you're offering aren't working for me. With the removal of all of the labels, as people can, 30%, by the way, switch denominations within 10 years of becoming an adult at 18. 30%, across all religions. 30% switch denominations. This is a great one. On the 500-year anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, only 75% of people who checked off that they were a Protestant denomination knew what the word Protestant meant. They were even familiar that Protestant was a word. So these boxes that we've put people in, the labels that people have had, you got to imagine that the religious organizations who have for so often been able to depend on those identities as an opportunity, on those labels. It's like if you were to go into your home and open up your spice cabinet, right? And you needed cinnamon, what would you do? You'd probably look at the labels. You don't need like to be, Julia Childs for this one. Right? You would look at the labels and you'd find the one that says cinnamon, right? But in this moment in which identities are so much more fluid than they used to be, and people don't step forward and say, I'm in this box, and I'm going to live in this box for the rest of my life. Say, well, sometimes I'm here, and sometimes I'm going to be here, and maybe this is the part of my identity that I'm going to meet with today, and this is the one I'm going to meet with tomorrow. And this, you know what, and this is one that I'm exploring right now, and maybe it's going to help me live a better life, and maybe it's not, and then I'm out. Or maybe I'm going to go to services at synagogue on Friday night, and I'm going to church on Sunday, so what box do you check? Well, the answer is we don't know. So what happens is these organizations who are they're really trying still to serve folks based on identity. It's like they're opening up a spice cabinet and all the labels are up. So what would you do then? Thank you. It means, no, that's the right answer. The right answer is there's no wholesale solution to be able to solve the problem of identity for it. It means that every single spice, you need to walk up to that spice and understand its essence, and understand its power, understand all its nature, and every single thing about that spice, you need to deeply engage with it. So it turns out that the church of the future is going to be a lot smaller. The church of the future is going to be built on one-on-one relationships. The church of the future is going to be built just like GBIO was built. One-on-one relationships in which you ask people, what keeps you up at night, and how might I walk along that path with you? How might we carve out that journey together? Because we're never going to figure out we can't depend on those labels anymore. They've all changed. Everything is fluid. So what's the fastest growing religious group in America today?
The nuns.
It's the nuns. The rise of the nuns. N-O-N-E-S. Not the nuns, not N-U-N-S. There's not like a monastery. It's like, oh, how can I invest in monasteries? No religion. It means, and by the way, there are 56 options. There are 56 options for what religion are you on the Pew survey. And the fastest growing one is none. That means that when people are asked to put the contents of their soul and their spirit and the path that they've walked and their vision for the future and their hopes for their family and all of the actionable love that they have in their hearts, they are saying, it doesn't fit in a box. So what do we call them inside the religious world? We call them nuns, and we call them the unaffiliated. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I'm unaffiliated, right? No, what it means is, no, I am some. I'm something. And today I might be this something, and tomorrow I might be that something, but I'm on a journey, and if you can't walk with me along that journey, I'm going to find someone else who will. Or I might end up lonely, and I don't want that. The rising generation of millennials, self-reported, is the most isolated generation of all time since we have begun taking surveys. Since the 1920s, the self-reported isolation metric for the 75 million rising millennials is higher than it has been in history in America. They're not nuns. They're not saying I'm nothing. They're saying, actually, it's really complicated. And I want you to engage and understand that, and I want you to walk with me. And I hope there's wisdom out there that can help serve me along that path, and I hope I can serve back that wisdom. I hope I can contribute to the bounty and the richness and the fabric of that religion and that community and that love. But you need to talk to me first. As soon as you write me off as a nun, it's over. So what's happening? By the way, since the 1990s, nuns have tripled. 38% of Americans 18 to 29. 38% are saying there's a lot here, but it doesn't fit in that box. So as religious organizations, we have a choice. We can I know I use all these food metaphors, but we're on lunchtime, I'm sorry. Get cheese and crackers. We can imagine ourselves as the general manager at a restaurant. Right on Newberry Street, so imagine you're one of those cafes. And you see somebody walk in, and come in through the front door, and you seat them at a table, and they pick up the menu, and they close the menu, and they get up and walk out. You can say one of two things. Well, I guess they weren't hungry. Which is what most organizations are saying. Well, they didn't come to worship services. They must not want to be loved. They must not feel lonely. Or you can say, I guess we don't have what they want on the menu. And those are the choices. So I want to close now with a little bit about the church of the future. Church is still the biggest business in America. Religion, at $1.5 trillion, is still the largest business in America, larger than all 10 of the top tech companies. We're so worried about what's happening in Silicon Valley, religion squashes those numbers. Right? Now it turns out they've got metrics that work, we don't. And it turns out they're making sure that every single one of their customers feels known. You sign into Amazon. Hey, Elon, how you doing? How'd you like that book? You know, you ordered those batteries. You might like these batteries. You sign into Facebook. Elon, don't forget your anniversary. You know, Elon, it's so-and-so's birthday. Elon, this is the news that we've curated because we actually know you better than you know yourself based on what you click. You know, I might say, well, you know, I'm very, very aware of the news, and I always read different sources, and I'm a total pluralist, and blah, blah, blah. But if I only click on Huffington Post, and I'm not interested in what's happening on the other side of that conversation, then Facebook's going to know me better than I think I know myself. Right? Happily. Tracking every single thing that's happening right now. Business and religion is still bigger. So the potential to gain in this moment, we are not in a moment of scarcity. We might experience erosion because the things we're measuring might be going down. But the abundant possibility of where we are, given the historical context, is greater than it has ever been. We can look at the 4,000 churches and say 4,000 churches are closed, or we can look at the 4,000 communities that used to be housed inside those churches and say, oh my God, look at all those people who we can serve. Or you can say, like the folks at Owenwood Missional Campus down in Texas, in the Texas Methodist Foundation, they say, oh my God, 4,000 empty buildings. What if we create mission-aligned co-working spaces for nonprofits and give social and spiritual entrepreneurs an opportunity to start their careers right here in these churches? Wouldn't Jesus have wanted that? What if we feed the homeless right here? Right here.
Right here.
What if we actually do that right here? We are in a moment of abundant possibility. You see, 2,000 years ago, there was one rabbi who left Jerusalem in the year 69. The Second Temple was destroyed in 70 CE. And one rabbi, Yochanan ben Zakkai, said, oh my goodness. I don't know that that's exactly what he said. I'm assuming, maybe there was like, yikes, this doesn't look good, okay? He made a deal with Vespasian. He said, I need to get out of here. And I see the writing on the wall. Things are changing. But I think that Judaism still has what to offer, even without the temple. Things change. So Vespasian said, all right, go. So Yochanan ben Zakkai went inside a coffin and snuck out of Jerusalem. And he took 5 of his favorite students with him. And he went down to a place called Yavne. And Yavne is near Tel Aviv, modern-day Tel Aviv. And in Yavne, they asked themselves, how might we rebuild a religion, rebuild a people, in which we can raise people up to be good neighbors, in which we can raise people up to be a mensch, it's a good soul, in which we can raise people up to do the kind thing and make the kind choice, in which we can raise people up to tithe and be generous with their time and their talent and their treasure, in which we can raise people up to serve God and serve one another, in which we can raise people up to be reminded 36 times in the Bible that when they were strangers in a strange land, so they better make sure that they are welcoming of anyone else who feels like a stranger. How might we do that? And they created something entirely, that was box 3 for Judaism. That's where they innovated. That's where over the course of the next 300 years, everything we know of today as Judaism was developed. We're in a moment of transition akin to that moment, which means that we don't need just one Yavne, and it can't just be for Judaism. It has to be that every single faith community, every single faith leader imagines themselves in light of that seismic shift. And not just, when I say leader, I don't just mean ordained. I mean every single person. I mean the priesthood of the masses. I mean every single person who throws their lot in and says, this is my community, and this is my place, and this is how I want to serve, and that's my mission, and this is how my love comes to fruition. Every single person needs to imagine themselves as if they're inside of Yavne right now, and saying, how might I be a part of that service? How might I be a part of bringing Jesus' vision to life, or God's vision to life? Or I don't care who you are filling in the blanks with. But every single person needs to imagine themselves as not just a bystander, but an upstander. And not just somebody who is watching things happen, but somebody who's making them happen. We're moving into a space and time in which Silicon Valley is worried about virtual reality, and everyone in this room needs to be concerned with virtuous reality. We need to imagine ourselves as the co-creators of a time in which that virtuous reality not only helps us live better lives in light of the way that our ancestors lived and the wisdom that they passed down to us and the traditions that they so generously left for us. But I heard many people around the room say, we moved here and we raised our kids in this church. Well, what's the wisdom that's going to serve them? And what's the wisdom that's going to serve their kids? It's going to look different. My son listens to different music than I listen to, and I'm certain that the music from the mid-90s was the greatest music era of all time. It was terrible, but I loved it, okay? So our kids are always going to do something different, and it's always going to look different, and the worship's going to sound different, and the spaces are going to be different, and the delivery system, it's a zine. I didn't even know what a zine was until I met Julie. Are you kidding me? Right? The delivery systems are going to be different, but if the soul is there, and the spirit is alive inside of it, then anything is possible. So when I left the synagogue, I left because I felt like we had tapped into a model that actually worked. It was an aging synagogue. We were really struggling to keep things moving. And I said, let's upgrade box 1, let's be aware of box 2, and let things go as we need to, and let's really invest in box 3. We became one of the fastest growing synagogues in the country. 127 new young families joined in 2.5 years. And I thought, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. Now, we still have a lot of work to do, okay? But when I chose to leave the synagogue, one of the main things I wanted to do was take that model and be able to serve other communities with that model. Right? I didn't invent it. It was just something I took. I'm like Robin Hood. I stole it from Harvard Business Review. And I applied it to the faith space, and it worked. Because I actually think in this moment, no matter how many times I went back to my board and they said scarcity, scarcity, erosion, erosion, what about replacing people in the pews? And I said, guys, abundance. That's where we're at right now. The last couple things about the church of the future. The gathered church is going to be a part of the future, not the whole. There's going to be a lot happening outside of the building. There are going to be many that even grow without a building. Small gatherings are going to lead to deeper impact. If you can imagine 10 years ago, it's likely that you had phone, internet, and television from the same provider, right? Okay. So we're moving into a time of unbundling, in which it might be that people come here for services on Sundays and they go to synagogue on Friday night. And maybe they have their life cycle events at another place, and maybe they go to meditation at the Vedanta Society down the street, and maybe but the unbundling is something that we need to be really aware of, which means that we have to have many, many, many points of access, and every one of those points of access needs to be just as welcoming with no judgment if you don't use all of the products and services. You know how many times Cox Cable calls me up and says, "Why don't you do the TV anymore?" You know, I said, "Well, I don't want TV." Right? I don't want TV. I just want my internet service. That's it. Stop calling me. Why are you calling me? Right? So we have to have no judgment whatsoever and no sales pitch whatsoever for all of the other parts of that bundle. And we have to understand that people might just come into it with one need, and that's it. And if we serve them for that need, that's great. We did the job. And the last thing, and this is why I'm so excited to be here this morning, is that those churches that choose mission over model are the ones that not only are surviving, but they're thriving. The ones that constantly go back to their mission and say, why was I put here on earth? Why does this community exist? Why does this building exist? When 150 years ago somebody laid those bricks, what did they hope was going to be said in the walls inside of this room in 2017? That's the question to ask. The last thing I'll leave you with is I work with a synagogue that is 150 years old. And it's in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a great city, but it's gone through its ups and downs. And this synagogue houses the Pittsburgh Platform. And the Pittsburgh Platform is like the constitution for the Reform movement. Okay? So the Reform movement was founded in the mid-1800s, and they wrote this constitution. They said, here's what we believe in, and this is how we're going to build communities from here on out. And they called us up a year and a half ago, and they said, you know, I think it's time for Pittsburgh Platform 2.0. So they went back, and we guided them in a study session to actually imagine themselves as the writers of the Pittsburgh Platform. What was the context that they operated in? What were their hopes? What were their dreams? What kept them up at night? And what were they trying to build? Who were they trying to serve? And I said, if you were to write Pittsburgh Platform 2.0 and you were to sign your name at the bottom of it, 2017, what would it say? And we rewrote it. So this is synagogue again. It's allowing themselves, giving them the courage to re-adopt a mission that helps them serve both current constituents and the people who might come 150 years from now. So I'll close where I started, which is simply to say, you could have cut to the chase. You have an incredible community. You have a community that is forward-thinking. You have a community that is concerned with what's happening on the margins and on the frontiers and right at the heart of the community. You have a community that is in constant transition, which is both a blessing and sometimes it's a challenge, but it's always an opportunity. And you have the leadership here, without question, that can continue to take you through those iterations into the future where 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 150 years from now, they'll say, you know, on that Sunday morning in 2017, when we dreamed up what might be possible, we realign ourselves in mission, and what we might build in light of that, that's where it all started. So I simply want to say thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for letting me tell you a little bit about my travels and a little bit about what I've learned and a little bit about some of the ideas that are roaming around in my head. And thank you for inspiring me. Because when you went around this morning, I honestly could have said, well, I'm not going to give a talk this morning because what you've said is enough wisdom for me to digest for a long time. This is a blessed institution. I'm grateful to it. Thank you.
So much for that. And as you just said that, when we went around the circle and there was enough wisdom to digest for a long time, woo, that is true. And what you have just said, I feel so grateful that our paths have crossed and that our communities are growing through partnerships with one another. And I also just feel so grateful that we're able to continue this conversation next week as well, because it is such a big one, and it is evocative. I know for me, there's like a million different points I would love to just hear from everybody on. And so, as we look towards next week, I do want to say that, of course, you don't need to come next week, and people who were not here today are so invited to be here next week. But throughout this week, if there are things that really did strike you in today's gathering that you would want to dive into more, please, we can talk afterwards. You stay around for a few minutes today, or send an email or a call so that we can shape a session that really responds to the things that are on your minds and hearts with this session today. So thank you so much for all being a part of that. And I think to close us, because I do think we're quite a bit after 1, is that true?
Yes.
Feel those vibes, all right. I think let's close us in my favorite way to close, which is with a one-word prayer. And there is perhaps no way to just get one word, but I will just invite us into a time of just some silence and to see if a word arises for you that evokes maybe where your mind is right now, where your heart is right now, something you want to lift before God. And we'll go around the circle and we'll just say that word. And that word can also be pass if no word comes to your mind. And that is an excellent word. So I will start, and then Elon will go to you, and then Charlene. But let's just take a moment to breathe and get silent.